So in Colombia, we've gotten a little bit more clarity when it comes to next year's presidential elections, the 2026 elections. The Centro Democrático, the party that is founded and led by Álvaro Uribe, the former president and former senator, has officially announced that the senator, the Centro Democrático senator, Paloma Valencia, is going to be the official party candidate. They had two internal surveys, so kind of like a survey. So they basically voted internally, and one of them was only for, it's kind of like in the U.S. you'll have primaries, and then in the primary, or you'll have a caucus like in Iowa. And in some primaries, the only registered party members can vote. And then in open primary states, anybody can vote for a primary candidate. So what the Centro Democrático did was they had two different internal polls. And so one poll, anybody could vote, and you didn't have to be registered officially as a member of the party, but you were expected to be someone who was aligned with the party. And then they had another one that only the party members could vote. And so they were conducted by an outside firm from Chile called CADEM, CADEM. And she actually got more votes in both versions of the poll from the other two leading Centro Democrático candidates, which interestingly were both women. So all the front runners, after Miguel Uribe was killed back a few months ago, he probably would have been the leading candidate. Uribe actually recruited him to run, and that caused some consternation. For example, María Fernanda Cabal didn't like that. But anyway, so Paloma Valencia is the candidate over María Fernanda Cabal and Paola Holguín. They're both legislators. María Fernanda is kind of like an interesting character herself. She is very, let's use outspoken as the nice word. She's kind of like the attack vanguard of the party. She's the one who's out there like the party enforcer. When Iván Duque was president, she called him a mamerto, which is a very insulting term in Colombian Spanish, because she felt that he was too soft and not hardline enough like she is, or like the founder Álvaro Uribe of the party is. María Fernanda is the wife of the head of Fedegan. Fedegan is the Cattle Ranchers Industry Association, which is very politically powerful. She is from Cali. But anyway, she complained a little bit, not so much, she didn't go out after Paloma Valencia, but she complained about the way that the poll was carried out. But it looks like at this point she's going to kind of fall in line. So now what's happening here? It seems like the Centro Democrático, which is a very polarizing party. Well, a lot of things in Colombia are polarizing. The current president is polarizing. And what happens is they are a party that's right of center. You could say like the Republicans or the Tories or something like that. But they have a lot of enemies, a lot of people who don't like them, even also on the right. So, for example, you have the other alternative parties for people who are right or center-right. The mayor of Medellin is not part of the Centro Democrático. So he might be friendly with them. They tend to support him, but he has his own political identity. You have the party Cambio Radical, which is out of, well, they're a national party, but they have their strength on the Caribbean coast. Vargas Lleras, the former vice president, is actually from that party. He was the vice president under the Santos administration, who was kind of a centrist president, but he even had his own party, the party of the U. That's what they called it. And I think the U stands for unity, but the party is officially called the U party. So Valencia is starting out. She only has about 1% of the declared support in national polls. And that doesn't really mean a lot because we're still early out. And Colombia gets a lot of candidates. We have, I think there were something like 80 people who had declared, but then you have to either get the backing of a recognized political party or you can get on the ballot with signatures. And that's actually, in the U.S., you usually see a fringe candidate or somebody trying to get on the ballot with signatures. Well, everybody has to get signatures in the U.S., but then let's say a write-in candidate, and it's not the same thing. But what happens is in Colombia, if you aren't part of a political party, then you can, and even if you are, then you go out. Well, if you are, you can go and have this plebiscite or this kind of party internal vote. But if you're not, then you can go out there and just get enough signatures, and then you're on the ballot. So there was a poll done the 1st of December. Senator Iván Cepeda is in the lead. He has about 32% of the support right now in people who were questioned. That kind of is not surprising. He represents a continuation of the current administration and the Pacto Histórico and the Colombia Humana and the whole Gustavo Petro phenomenon. They are allied and they are friends, but Cepeda is not part of the current administration. He doesn't hold any kind of formal, well, he did. I take that back. He did, but in Colombia, what happens is if you're going to run for office, you have to resign. You can't hold office while you're running for another office. We see a lot in the U.S. where somebody will be a senator and run for president, and if they don't do well, they just go back to being a senator. That you can't do that in Colombia. If you're going to run and be a politician, you have to resign from whatever public position that you hold. And also, it is illegal in Colombia for sitting politicians to come out and support anyone who is a political candidate. So in this upcoming election, if you see, for example, Gustavo Petro, he can't come out and say anything publicly in support of Senator Iván Cepeda, even though everybody knows that Petro supports him. So in second place of this poll is the right-wing populist lawyer Abelardo de la Espriella. He's another interesting character. He's a defense lawyer, and he's defended a whole lot of really bad guys. And I know that the other candidates are kind of can't wait to use that against him, because he really not only has defended a lot of mega criminals in Colombia, but he started a foundation that was a nonprofit that mega criminals supposedly donated to. But he's this guy where I think he tried to have a career, and all of this was since being a lawyer, where he was going to be a musician and reduce music and things like that. And he's come out with his own brand of rum, and he's come out with his own line of clothing. He reminds me sort of like a Donald Trump style political entrepreneur, I would say. And he seems to adore the spotlight. But right now, because he really has been the only one actively campaigning, especially since Miguel Uribe Turbay got assassinated, he is currently taking a big chunk of the vote on the right, or those that would oppose the current leftist administration and policies. The former mayor of Medellin, Sergio Fajardo, he's got about 8.5%. He kind of, he used to be the governor of Antioquia as well. He's run for president several times. He is one of these candidates. He could have a breakout, but he seems to have some people that support him. He's a math professor, fluent in English. There's a great interview out there on YouTube, if you can find it, where Charlie Rose interviews him, and that was interesting. It's quite dated now. I think it's well over 10 years old, but it's interesting and it's worth watching out there. But anyway, the thing is that a lot of the candidates are really just now getting started. So Mauricio Cárdenas, who is the former finance minister, in my opinion, a very good finance minister during the presidential administration of Santos, Juan Manuel Santos, is running, and he would be kind of a center-right, market-friendly candidate. And he seems like, I've met him a couple times, I don't know him, but he seems like, aside from being, entering into politics, because he's been a policy guy up until now, he's been, working in different ministries and things like that, but he seems like a really nice guy from afar. Like I said, I don't know him, but he doesn't seem like the typical politician who's out there mudslinging and things like that. However, we'll see when things get going. Now, with these polls, especially this early, Ivan Duque only had like 1% when he was first kind of named the Centro Democrático candidate, but of course he won the presidency. And what happens is that the Centro Democrático has a machine behind it that Fajardo doesn't have, that Espriella doesn't have, even though Espriella is making a lot of noise. But the machinery of an established political party is going to count. Now, we still haven't seen what these parties like the U are going to do. The Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, and that's what their names are. There's actually a party, it's called the Liberal Party, and there's a party called the Conservative Party in Colombia. And then there are other parties that are, actually it's kind of weird though, because the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party in Colombia share a lot of the same platform these days. It's not like it was 50 years ago when their platforms were very different. It's almost like you have a candidate and the candidate has his own platform, but a party and a candidate will adopt each other out of convenience for political power. And so that then what will happen is if you win, then the party is going to expect you to, their benefit is they're going to get all these cabinet nominations and deputy assistant directorships and all these types of things like that. So one of the reasons it seems like the Centro Democrático might have chosen Valencia over Cabal is because, well, and there's an article in La Silla Vacía, which is a great investigative, they do investigative reporting. It's a journal down here in Colombia, but they also do a lot of political analysis, and they're very, in my opinion, unbiased. I mean, you'll see an article, any one article, and you'll say, oh, that article's really, chopping up these people on the right. But then tomorrow you'll see an article and they're chopping up these people on the left. So overall, I think that they do an excellent job with their analysis. But anyway, there's an article that's suggesting that the Uribismo, which is the Centro Democrático movement, is playing towards the center, which I agree with, because if you look at their three candidates, Paloma Valencia is, she's certainly a right of center candidate, but she's not this fire and brimstone, burn down everything kind of person. When she talks, she doesn't come across like a firebrand like Maria Fernanda Cabal, who is a firebrand. And I think that she would accept that moniker proudly. She's I remember during the pandemic, she had this face mask thing, and it was a Donald Trump face mask that she was wearing, because they're kind of like it. She's the one who will come out there and say, well, you could say crazy things, but she'll come out there and she's not a bridge builder. Let's put it that way. She's not out there trying to find bipartisan consensus. She wants to defeat all the other parties, and it's kind of like her way or the highway. Kind of like how Gustavo Petro is the same thing. He's this big super leftist ideologue who is not out there. He did experiment at the beginning with trying to bring in some people. I remember he had a finance minister who was thought to be reasonable, but he goes through cabinet ministers faster than people change underwear. And then he complains and says, you didn't get my policies done. Well, nobody stays in office long enough to implement anything. And in fact, it's kind of like one of these reality shows. There's one down here in Colombia called Casa de los Famosos. And there's some in the U.S., and I don't follow this stuff, but there's, where they get all these misfits and put them in a house or put them on an island or somewhere. And then you watch all the drama between them, and you see these, women are catfighting, and they vote each other out, and they throw one person out, and these people are over here doing that. These kind of reality shows. That's what it's like watching the current politics inside of Casa Nariño, which is the presidential palace, or like the White House for Colombia. These guys, they're against each other. And so you have Armando Benedetti, who's the interior minister, and he's trying to get these people thrown out. There's already another battle going on right now between Benedetti and the head of the UNGRD. I forget the guy's name, but there's so much infighting within the administration let's say this minister versus that minister, and people moving around and trying to do all these different kind of machinations. It's like what was that TV show called House of Cards or something like that in the U.S., where the guy ended up getting in some kind of harassment trouble, the actor, but it was like about the White House or something like, it's like that. Okay. But not as well dressed, because the people, they tend to wear these ski hiker vest, and this current administration does not like dressing up. You only see them with like suits and ties if they're hosting a foreign delegation or something like that. I think this part of their idea that they want to be like the everyman and be in solidarity with el pueblo and all that kind of nonsense and stuff like that. But anyway, so Valencia will be much more appealing to people that are not hardcore firebrands on the right. They'll still vote for her, but I think that everyday kind of Colombians who are not deeply politically aligned will find her acceptable. It actually, with a lot of those non-aligned Colombians, can work against her that she's aligned with Uribe, but she probably is the best bet of the party regaining the presidential palace. Now, part of the problem is that the last president, Ivan Duque, who seems like a nice guy, but really was kind of a failure as a president. We wrote an article in Finance Colombia about it, why nobody likes Ivan. And I think that he probably would have been a great foreign minister or something like that. He seems to enjoy that kind of atmosphere where you're at these, I like going into them too, they're kind of fun, these diplomatic cocktail parties and receptions and things like that. And then you go these policy symposiums and these kinds of things. And I think now he's off in Washington. Part of the criticism against him when he ran for president was that he spent more of his adult life in Washington than he has in Colombia. I don't know if that's factually true, but that's been an accusation leveled of him. And I believe last I checked, he was back in either in one of these institutions, one of these think tanks, as a distinguished fellow or as a senior fellow. So he really is suited to that environment, and he never really seemed to connect with people, the Jose Six-Pack on the street or anything like that. He didn't, the hardliners in his own party didn't like him. He kind of felt like he owed a lot to his political patron, Álvaro Uribe, but on the other hand, he just really was not very effective. And so things kind of bumbled along. When you look at the different riots that they held, you look at how the SMAT police getting out of control, things like that. You look at even his presidential helicopter was shot at when he was in Cucuta. You look at things like he did not carry out the peace plan that was signed into law during the Santos administration previously, because Uribe was against it. And so Uribe was his political patron, but then he didn't come out with anything to replace it with. So things just muddled along and nobody was happy. The armed groups began to regather power and strength, but that really accelerated after Petro took over. So Paloma Valencia actually is coming out, and she has what she calls a Plan Colombia 2.0, which is interesting. She's a granddaughter of the former president Guillermo León Valencia, and she kind of represents and Colombia is very strong in this institutionalist tradition. Colombia is generally wary of people that want to rock the boat, and it's going to be hard to get a Trump/Espriella presidency. But then again, don't listen to me. I was surprised to see Trump becoming the president. So maybe Espriella gets in there, or somebody else might get in there. You never know. But anyway, she focuses on technology. She has a platform, a technology forward platform, and also what she calls Plan Colombia 2.0. So Plan Colombia has been the security partnership between the United States and Colombia that goes back to, I believe, the Carter administration. It may go back older, but I'm pretty sure that it really started formally in the Carter administration. And she wants to revive that. So while Petro was kind of on the outs with the U.S., Trump put him on the Clinton list. So the poor guy, when he gets out of office, can't have a bank account or a credit card. He's going to, have trouble trying to fly off to France where one of his daughters lives, or I think he also has an Italian passport, which will not save him. I'm talking about Gustavo Petro. His wife just got back from Sweden, where she was living for several months. But it's going to be, so her plan is to have this Plan Colombia. And this Plan Colombia is going to call for a tighter security partnership between the U.S. and Colombia, and to stamp out the rebels, to really squash the rebels. And when I say rebels, I mean like the ELN, the EPL, which you don't hear about much these days, but they're out there. The FARC dissidents, which are not really rebels in the sense of the old FARC had this Marxist vision that they were going to overthrow the government and bring in this socialist workers' paradise and all that kind of stuff like that. The remaining FARC dissidents under people like Calarca and Ivan Mordisco and these guys, they're just a mafia. They claim all this pueblo and people and all this kind of stuff like that, but they really are just a mafia, and they extort people and kidnap people and things like that. They're not ideologues in the sense, I mean, they wear that mask, but they're really not trying to bring about a better socialist paradise world or any of that kind of stuff like that. So that's going to be interesting to see how she does with that. Now, going back to the way that you have the parties and they pick their candidates, and so you have other parties out there that still have to announce what they're going to do, like the Conservative Party, like the Cambio Radical, which is interesting because the party's name is Radical Change, and you think they'd be some kind of big left-wing outfit or anything like that, but they're not. They're really kind of like they're sort of like a center-right party, almost like kind of like a Republican. Well, not the Republican Party today that's kind of become the Trumpire, but like the let's say they're like George W. Bush Republicans or something like that. So, and they also have a regional bias. They're a national party, but they're strong in the Caribbean coast, and so they have to decide. Okay, hey, this is our candidate. This is who we're going to get behind. Espriella de la Espriella has said that he may bypass the inter-party consultations and run directly for the first round, which Valencia has come out and criticized because she's saying, look, if we're on the right, and even though we're all different people, we need to unite, because if we're divided, that might help the Petro or the Petrista candidate get in there, Ivan Cepeda. And we don't want that if we're all on the same side. So we ought to get together and decide among ourselves and like form a unified front. Because what she's saying is that if we have Espriella and then another candidate from the U or Cambio Radical or wherever, then you're going to have 6 candidates on the right and then one unified candidate on the left, and that he's going to be able to win. And in a way, that's sort of what happened in the last election, because you had a couple of candidates. You had Fico, the current mayor of Medellin, who was a candidate, and then you had Rodolfo Hernandez, who was the former mayor of Bucaramanga. And they were 2 candidates who were, and when I say on the right, I don't mean like super hardliner Pinochettes or anything like that, but they were either center right or somewhere they weren't leftist, okay? And then you had Petro, who's like the one leftist candidate. And Rodolfo Hernandez had the problem that he had some corruption things that were out there. He hadn't been convicted at. He ended up being convicted where he had given a trash contract to his son or something like that. I don't remember the details, but he had allegations of corruption over his head, and he was also very old. And then you had Fico, Federico Gutierrez, the former and now once again mayor of Medellin, and they split the center and right vote, allowing Petro to go ahead and kind of take it all. So, and then also another thing that happened is let's say when people who supported Fico, when he, they weren't so enamored with going out and voting for Rodolfo Hernandez and vice versa. So those, even though they all maybe opposed Petro, they didn't really unite and get together to make sure they were saying, hey, if we wanted Fico to win, and Federico Gutierrez didn't win, we're not going to go out there and support Hernandez just to stop Petro. They didn't think like that, and that's how Petro got in. So when we look at the international business community, it's interesting because the outsider also tends to cause more volatility in things like the peso and sovereign bond yields and things like that, because it brings political uncertainty and unpredictability. You don't know what the candidate's going to do. Nobody knows what an Espriella candidate, a presidency, would look like. With somebody like Valencia, you sort of have an idea. It goes back to that institutionalism that you saw, let's say, with Álvaro Uribe or Santos. And Santos served as both the defense minister and the finance minister before eventually becoming president himself. Or even during Ivan Duque, which was not, that was a rocky presidency, but you didn't have financial adventurism or any kind of crazy ideas to remake the country into a Marxist paradise or anything like that. So because of that, I believe that Valencia will have that institutional support both domestically and tacitly abroad as well. She runs on a platform that she calls radical austerity, where she actually wants to reduce the number of cabinet ministries. Right now, there are 19 different ministers, and she wants to reduce that to 12. And she also wants to bring artificial intelligence and energy transition into play to drive growth in GDP. Now, what you would expect with her when it comes to energy is she probably will not be an anti-petroleum president like you have with Gustavo Petro. She probably will be friendlier to the petroleum industry and to mining as well, while at the same time being also friendly to renewable energy sources. Colombia, actually, because of this volcanic and its geology, is really good for things like geothermal energy. There are several deep geothermal plants in production here in Colombia, but then you also have natural gas. You also have, there's coal, but as far as I know, Colombia isn't really using coal to generate energy. It exports coal there, but there's a Cerrejón mine up near the Atlantic coast, near the Caribbean coast, that is a coal exporting area, but it's not really used for local consumption. But you'll see things like wind farms, you'll see things like solar energy. And the current administration is interesting because they talk about how they want to see all this green energy, but several projects have collapsed because the permits couldn't get done. The government was not friendly enough and not helpful enough to allow those companies to begin construction and go into production. So several projects have actually fallen apart during the current administration. So what we can expect to see is that, so far, is that the left is going to unite behind Ivan Cepeda. You also have moderate left, center-left candidates. Claudia Lopez, who is a former mayor of Bogotá. She was the previous mayor before the current Galan, who's the mayor right now. She's formidable. She has a lot of support in Bogotá, in Cundinamarca. Again, you'd have another woman candidate, which would be interesting. She could be a strong contender. The question is going to be, what kind of support does she have and what kind of political machinery does she have outside of the capital city? But she's a name that's out there on the center left. But then you also have the center itself, and you could say center right, and you're talking about technocrats like Mauricio Cárdenas. And I don't say technocrat as an insult. I think he probably would do a very good job. He did as a finance minister, and he also seems to have a lot of human decency. Juan Manuel Galan, David Luna, they're trying to kind of build a seed and try to build like a unified front and saying, look, you don't have to, because there's a lot of people, like I mentioned, who are not leftist, but don't like Uribe because they think he's corrupt, or they think he violated human rights, or they think we can't just keep going to the same, playing the same tune over and over again, whatever reason. There are people out there that would be drawn to a viable alternative that's not Petro or Petrista and not Uribistas. So El Tiempo notes, and I mentioned these articles that I researched this with, and I'll give you links to these The challenge for Centro Democrático is if they can lead a grand coalition and bring in some of these center-right people and get them on their side rather than running against them to dilute the vote. Now, what happens in Colombia is that you'll have a first round of presidential elections, and whoever's on the ballot's on the ballot. And then the top two vote getters will have a runoff. And so at the beginning, it's open and, you can get in there and maybe you have a big party machine behind you, or maybe you're this populist upstart who just has gotten a groundswell of support. Whatever the case might be, the top two vote getters are going to make it to the runoff. Now, if one person gets more than 50% of the vote, that person's in there and no runoff is necessary. But then if you have a runoff, then you see who's number one and who's number two. And in Colombia, number two, so let's say you're the losing presidential candidate and you're the one who comes in second place, you get an automatic Senate seat. So you're going to be in the Senate. But anyway, next March, we're going to have legislative elections. That's going to tell us a lot because we're going to be able to look and see what presidential candidate's party, if they have a party, is doing well. And then we're going to have the presidential rounds in May. And then if necessary, which it'll probably be necessary, a runoff in June. So Paloma that's kind of a shift from the hard right stance of the hardcore Uribistas that we would see with somebody like Maria Fernanda Cabal. And she's going back to that, at least this is the perception and based on what she says, going back towards that technocratic kind of security focused platform, because the security has been a concern. The security situation in Colombia has worsened under Gustavo Petro. And so she's talking about reestablishing that cooperation with the United States. The United States and Colombia in recent years has had excellent relations until about halfway through this current administration when things started to fall apart. But anyway, we'll monitor the fiscal proposals of these candidates, especially when it comes to what they would do differently than the current administration's paz total, which means total peace policy. Petro ran on a promise of total peace, and what we've gotten is almost total chaos. These groups are resurgent, and he's been powerless to stop them, whether he has the desire to or not. So anyway, I want to ask you something. So aside from the usual like and subscribe that people always say, and which tells the platform that you want more of this, and this is true on YouTube, but it's also true on the audio podcast platforms. They all have, and we're found everywhere. We're found on Spotify. We're found on Audible. We're found on Apple iTunes Podcast, iHeartRadio, that one as well. We're found out there. But they all have ways that you can like the podcast that you're listening to, obviously on YouTube as well. And then that tells it, hey, I want more of this. And so then their algorithm will give you more. But I'm asking you not to trust the algorithm, because some ornery politician, whether it's Petro or Uribe or Trump or Xi Jinping or whoever, might get pissed off with me and just pull strings to get us deplatformed, to get us removed. You might have probably seen cases like this already where you're listening to some YouTuber or podcaster or whatever, and then they just disappear because they said something that somebody didn't like. And actually now, because everything is so AI focused, the AI just blocks things. And then you can't even, this actually happened to us on Facebook, where our Cognitive Business News, which is one of our publications, Facebook just took it down and said it's fake. Like we're imposters. And I'm like, we own the publications and we can prove it. But before we could say that we owned it, it took me about 5 months to even reach anybody. Okay, it was that bad. So they just basically deplatformed us. We don't really publish controversial things on that publication. It's about the BPO industry and customer experience and location strategy when it comes to international businesses and things like that. But we just disappeared. And it took 5 months to get the platform back. We could not even reach anybody at Facebook. So what I'm asking you to do is aside from giving us the like and subscribe and that routine, which does help, and please do it, the links in the description, subscribe to our newsletter. So subscribe to our newsletter. That way we have a way to communicate with you directly no matter what happens. The link is is for Finance Colombia. Just go to fcsubscribe.com. That's just fcsubscribe.com, FCSUBSCRIBE, fcsubscribe.com, and it'll take you to a subscription form. I'll never share your email. We've been in business for over a decade, and we've never shared our email database with anyone, and we never will. One day you want to be removed from it, it's actually automatic. Glad to do that, and doesn't offend us. Sometimes people change email addresses because they change jobs or something like that, or they go from Hotmail to Gmail or whatever the case might be. Or I subscribe sometimes to things that I'm a member of just because I get too much email. But anyway, thank you. Be kind, be safe, and stay smart.